Before we drift into the spectral intrigues of the afterlife, allow me to extend a whispered invitation. If you enjoy tales of the long-departed and their undying dramas, consider subscribing to Nightfall Notions. Here, we specialize in the art of the boring bedtime story, where history's most tedious grievances are given the spotlight they so desperately crave. Now let us step into the velvet-draped corridors of the eternal elite, where even death cannot strip them of their pride. Chapter 1. The Crowned Dead. An introduction to royal ghosts. There's a particular breed of spectre that clings to the mortal world with more tenacity than a barnacle to a ship's hull. The royal ghost. These are not your common, garden-variety phantoms, moaning about unfinished business or rattling chains in a fit of existential confusion. No, royal ghosts are different. They are petty. To understand why, one must first grasp the sheer magnitude of their earthly entitlement. A monarch, after all, spends a lifetime being told they are divinely appointed, their every whim a decree, their every tantrum a matter of state. Death, for such a creature, is not a release from this grandeur but an unbearable demotion. Imagine spending centuries as the unquestioned center of the universe, only to find yourself reduced to drifting through drafty castle hallways, ignored by the living, and worst of all, forced to share the afterlife with lesser spirits. The indignity is enough to make even the most stoic royal ghost slam an incorporeal door in spectral frustration. Take, for example, the ghost of King Louis XIV of France, the Sun King himself. In life, he transformed Versailles into a glittering stage for his ego, demanding that his courtiers attend his every waking moment, from his lever, the ceremonial rising from bed, to his coucher, the equally ceremonial tucking back in. Death did not soften these habits. Visitors to Versailles still report encountering a translucent Louis, his ghostly face locked in a permanent scowl, trailing a procession of phantom courtiers through the Hall of Mirrors. He is not haunting, mind you. He is holding court. The living, of course, are expected to play their part. Those who fail to bow are subjected to the most terrifying punishment a royal ghost can muster, a withering, silent stare of disapproval. Then there is Queen Anne Boleyn, who famously lost her head but none of her attitude. Her ghost is said to wander the Tower of London, carrying her severed head under her arm like an inconvenient parcel. But do not mistake this for a tragic display of posthumous distress. Anne's ghost is not mournful. She is furious. Specifically, furious about the way history remembers her. She lingers not to seek justice for her execution, but to correct the record on far more pressing matters. The cut of her gowns, the sharpness of her wit, and the audacity of anyone suggesting she was anything less than the most fascinating woman in Henry VIII's life. Visitors who dare to repeat schoolyard rhymes about her, divorced, beheaded, died, often find themselves on the receiving end of a spectral sigh so dramatic it chills the air. The pettiness of royal ghosts is not confined to Europe. In Japan, the spirit of Emperor Sutoku lingers not as a vengeful demon, as some legends claim, but as the ultimate sore loser. In life, he was exiled after a failed power struggle and vowed to haunt the nation in retaliation. In death, he does so, but not with earthquakes or plagues as one might expect. Instead, he specializes in minor inconveniences. Misfiled paperwork, inexplicably sour tea, the sudden disappearance of a single sock from a freshly laundered pair, all are attributed to Sutoku's lingering grudge. He is less a terrifying specter and more of an eternal bureaucrat, ensuring that no one in Japan ever fully enjoys a day without some trivial annoyance. What unites these royal ghosts is not just their stubborn refusal to move on, but their insistence that the afterlife adhere to the same hierarchies as the living world. They are the original influencers, desperate to maintain their relevance long after their audience has turned to dust. And so they linger, fussing over long-faded titles, correcting historical slights, and ensuring that even in death, no one forgets who they were. The next time you feel a sudden chill in a historic palace, or hear the distant sound of a sigh echoing through a ruined throne room, remember, you may not be in the presence of a tormented soul. You may instead have stumbled upon a royal ghost's latest performance in a never-ending campaign for attention. And if you know anything about monarchs, living or dead, you know they hate being ignored. Chapter 2. The Haunted Throne Room, where egos never die. If there is one place where the pettiness of royal ghosts reaches its peak, it is the throne room. This sacred space, once the beating heart of a monarch's power, becomes in death a stage for their most enduring performance. The delusion that they still matter. Consider the throne room's purpose in life. It was not merely a chair. It was a symbol, a weapon, a carefully crafted illusion of dominance. The architecture itself was designed to intimidate, with ceilings soaring high enough to make supplicants feel insignificant, and thrones elevated so that even the tallest subject had to crane their neck upward. The monarch sat enthroned, bathed in light, while everyone else stood in shadow, a living embodiment of the divine right to rule. Death, of course, does not dismantle such arrogance, it preserves it. The phantom rulers who haunt these chambers refuse to accept that their reign is over. They glided across the same floors they once paced in impatience, their translucent fingers trailing over gilded armrests that no longer bear their weight. Some still hold phantom courts, listening to the pleas of long-dead courtiers, nodding sagely at petitions that will never be answered. Others simply linger, waiting for an audience that will never come. Take, for instance, the ghost of Emperor Nero, who reportedly haunts the ruins of the Domus Aurea in Rome. In life, he was a man so enamored with his own legend that he allegedly fiddled while his city burned. In death, he has taken up residence in what remains of his golden palace, holding spectral performances for an audience of dust and echoes. Visitors who dare to enter his throne room sometimes hear the faint strains of a lyre, played with all the skill of a man who believed himself a god of the arts. The music is, by all accounts, mediocre. But try telling Nero that. His ghost is said to glare at anyone who fails to applaud, his expression a mixture of outrage and wounded pride, as if the living still owe him their admiration. Then there is the throne room of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, where the ghost of Catherine the Great is said to linger. In life, she was a ruler of formidable intellect, and even more formidable vanity, surrounding herself with philosophers, artists, and lovers who knew better than to contradict her. In death, she has not relinquished her grip on power. Witnesses claim to see her sitting imperiously on her throne, surrounded by the faint, shimmering outlines of her long-dead advisors. She does not speak, but her presence alone is a demand, an expectation that the living should still tremble before her. The most tragicomic of all, however, might be the throne room of the Hofburg Palace in Vienna, where the ghost of Emperor Franz Joseph I is said to haunt his old seat with the same bureaucratic diligence he showed in life. This was a man who, by all accounts, treated ruling as a tedious but necessary duty, signing papers with the enthusiasm of a clerk, counting down the minutes until lunch. His ghost does much the same. Visitors report seeing a translucent figure hunched over a spectral desk, signing documents that dissolve into mist before they can be read. Occasionally, he sighs, a sound so heavy with resignation it could curdle milk. He is not haunting out of malice, nor out of a desire to relive his glory days. No, Franz Joseph haunts because he cannot fathom the idea of leaving work unfinished. What unites these spectral rulers is their refusal to let go of the one thing they cherished most in life, control. Even in death they cling to the rituals of power, replaying the motions of rulership like actors in a play that has long since closed. The throne room, once a place of absolute authority, becomes a prison of their own making. A gilded cage where they pace and posture, forever waiting for a kingdom that will never again bow to their will. And so, if you ever find yourself standing in an ancient throne room, feeling an inexplicable chill, or hearing the faint rustle of robes where no living soul walks. Remember this. You are not in the presence of a tragic spirit yearning for peace. You are in the presence of a monarch who still thinks you should be kneeling. Chapter 3. The Ghostly Grudge. Royal Feuds Beyond the Grave. If there is one thing royals love more than power, it is a good feud. Bloodlines, borders, and even the slightest perceived slights have sparked wars that reshaped nations. But death, as it turns out, does little to cool these tempers. In fact, for many royal ghosts, the afterlife is simply another battlefield, one where the weapons are whispered insults, rearranged furniture, and the occasional pilfered spectral crown. Take, for example, the enduring enmity between the ghosts of Queen Elizabeth Thy of England and Mary, Queen of Scots. In life, their rivalry was the stuff of legend, a tangled web of politics, religion, and personal animosity that ended with Mary's execution. One might assume that centuries in the afterlife would have softened their grudges. One would be wrong. Visitors to the Tower of London and Hampton Court Palace have reported hearing two distinct, regal voices engaged in what can only be described as the world's most passive-aggressive argument. Elizabeth's ghost, ever the master of cutting remarks, is said to critique Mary's fashion choices. Still wearing that mourning black, how original. While Mary's spirit retaliates by pointedly speaking French in Elizabeth's presence, knowing full well the Tudor queen prided herself on her linguistic skills, yet always resented how effortlessly Mary spoke. Occasionally, the feud escalates to petty vandalism. Portraits of Elizabeth are found slightly askew, while Mary's ghostly embroidery is said to unravel itself in the dead of night. But these spectral squabbles are not confined to European monarchs. In the forbidden city of Beijing, the ghosts of emperors past continue their dynastic dramas with the same intensity as when they were alive. The most infamous of these is the feud between the Yongzheng emperor and his brother, Yinsi, who in life was stripped of his titles and forced to adopt a humiliating new name as punishment for his political maneuvers. Death has not lessened Yinsi's resentment. Servants and tourists alike have reported hearing furious arguments echoing from empty halls, though the words themselves are lost, spoken in a dialect so archaic that even modern scholars struggle to decipher it. The only clear sign of their conflict. The way certain artifacts in the palace museums are inexplicably moved overnight, as if one ghost keeps rearranging history to suit his preferred narrative. Perhaps the most delightfully petty of these ghostly grudges belongs to King Richard III of England and Henry Tudor, the man who defeated him at Bosworth Field. Richard's ghost, still indignant about Shakespeare's portrayal of him as a hunchbacked villain, is said to haunt Leicester Cathedral, where his remains were reburied in 2015. But Henry's ghost, ever the opportunist, seems to have followed him. Visitors report strange occurrences: the faint sound of a horse's whinny at midnight, the sensation of being watched near the tomb, and, most bizarrely, the occasional misplaced crown. Richard's reconstructed skeletal exhibit is sometimes found with its head slightly turned, as if glaring at an unseen foe. Historians insist this is due to vibrations in the building, but those who have seen Henry's portrait smirk knowingly. Even in death, these monarchs cannot let go of their rivalries. They bicker over long, irrelevant disputes, sabotage each other's posthumous legacies, and generally behave like immortal toddlers fighting over a toy kingdom that none of them can ever rule again. The grudges are as eternal as the spirits themselves, fueled by the one thing that unites royals across time and culture: the unshakable belief that they were right and their enemies were not just wrong, but unforgivably so. So the next time you walk through a historic palace and hear an unexplained whisper, or notice a painting that seems just a little more crooked than it was yesterday, consider this: you may have stumbled upon the latest skirmish in a war that ended centuries ago. For royal ghosts, the fight is never over. it simply becomes ghostlier. Chapter 4. The Phantom Protocol. Etiquette among Dead Monarchs. The living imagine death as a great equalizer, a silent democracy where kings and peasants alike fade into the same peaceful oblivion. Royal ghosts, however, would sooner dissipate into the void than tolerate such egalitarian nonsense. For them, the afterlife is merely an extension of court, one where the rules of etiquette are not only preserved, but enforced with spectral fervor. To understand the depth of this obsession, one must first appreciate how thoroughly protocol was woven into the fabric of royal life. Every gesture, every word, every moment of a monarch's existence was dictated by centuries of tradition, designed to reinforce their divine superiority. A misplaced bow could spark an international incident. Poorly timed cough during an audience might result in exile. Death does not erase such compulsions, it eternalizes them. The ghost of Louis XIV, for instance, remains as fastidious in death as he was in life. Visitors to Versailles who fail to observe proper decorum, neglecting to bow when passing certain portraits, or worse, wearing modern footwear on the parquet floors he once demanded be polished to mirror-like perfection, often find themselves subject to invisible but unmistakable corrections. Doors slam without warning. Mirrors fold inexplicably, as if sighing in disapproval. On one particularly memorable occasion, a tourist in shorts was reportedly followed through the Hall of Mirrors by an icy draft that lingered precisely at knee-height, as though the Sun King himself were attempting to shame the man into dressing properly. Across the Channel, the ghost of Queen Victoria haunts Buckingham Palace with similar rigidity, though her concerns are less about fashion and more about propriety. Staff members whisper of pianos that play themselves in the dead of night, the melodies always somber and appropriately dignified. Any attempt to introduce livelier music is met with discordant notes and the distinct sensation of being glared at by a very short, very unamused, spectral monarch. Even other ghosts are not spared her judgment. The spirit of Prince Albert is said to materialize only when summoned by his wife, standing dutifully at her side until dismissed with a regal nod. But nowhere is the enforcement of phantom protocol more absurdly precise than in the Hofburg Palace's imperial apartments, where the ghost of Empress Elizabeth of Austria, known as Sisi, lingers. In life, she was obsessed with beauty and ritual, spending hours having her hair elaborately styled and her corsets tightened to inhuman proportions. In death, she has turned her attention to policing the grooming habits of the living. Security cameras have captured hairbrushes moving of their own accord, hovering near the heads of unsuspecting female staff members as if judging their updos. Those deemed lacking have reported sudden, inexplicable tugs at their hair, not painful, but undeniably firm, as though an invisible hand were attempting to correct their slovenly ways. Even meals are not exempt from these post-mortem standards. In the Kremlin, the ghost of Ivan the Terrible is said to materialize during state banquets, his translucent form hovering near the head of the table. Diplomats who reach for their wine before the proper toast risk finding their glasses mysteriously emptied onto the floor. Those who speak out of turn sometimes feel an icy grip on their wrists, forcing their hands back into their laps. It is as though the Tsar, centuries after his death, still insists on presiding over every dinner party held within his domain. What makes these hauntings particularly amusing is how they extend to interactions between the royal dead themselves. The ghosts of monarchs who despised each other in life must now share eternity in close quarters, yet they stubbornly maintain the same courtly pretenses. The spirits of King George IV and his estranged wife, Caroline of Brunswick, still refuse to acknowledge each other in the corridors of Windsor Castle, passing by like ships in the night, if those ships were capable of pointedly looking in opposite directions, while radiating centuries-old resentment. The most elaborate display of phantom protocol, however, belongs to the Spanish royal ghosts of El Escorial. Here, The spirits of Habsburg kings and queens are said to hold full midnight courts in the monastery's cavernous halls, reacting ceremonies with painstaking accuracy. Witnesses, usually exhausted night guards or overworked historians, describe seeing rows of translucent nobility processing through the shadows, bowing to empty thrones and engaging in perfectly timed, utterly silent conversation. Any living person who stumbles upon the scene and commits a faux pas, gasps, drops something, or heaven forbid, attempts to take a photograph, risks triggering a collective spectral glare so intense it has been known to cause migraines. For these royal ghosts, etiquette is not merely tradition, it is identity. Strip away the bows, the titles, the rigidly structured interactions, and what remains? Just another soul, adrift in the darkness. And so they cling to their protocols, enforcing them upon the living and the dead alike, because to do otherwise would be to admit that none of it ever truly mattered. The next time you visit a palace and feel an inexplicable urge to stand up straighter, or find yourself suddenly self-conscious about your posture as you pass a particular portrait, remember, you may be in the presence of a ghost who still cares deeply about such things. And they have nothing but time to make sure you care too. Chapter 5. The Cursed Jewels. Why Royal Ghosts Guard Their Bling. If there is one thing that can make a royal ghost abandon even the pretense of dignity, it is the thought of someone else touching their jewelry. Crowns, scepters, necklaces dripping with gemstones. These were not mere decorations in life, but physical manifestations of power, tangible proof of divine favor. Death might have stripped monarchs of their thrones, but it will pry their treasures from their cold, dead hands only with great difficulty. And even then, they will probably complain about it. Consider the infamous Hope Diamond, that breathtaking blue curse magnet. While historians debate whether Louis XIV ever actually owned it, his ghost certainly seems to think so. The diamond's current home in the Smithsonian has seen more than its share of strange occurrences. Security cameras flickering when no one is near the case, the temperature dropping suddenly around the jewel, and on one memorable occasion, a guard swearing he saw a translucent hand pressed against the glass with possessive intensity. Louis, who in life adored showing off his wealth, now haunts the diamond like a particularly territorial dragon, ensuring no one forgets that it was, is, and always will be his. The British crown jewels have their own spectral guardian in the form of Henry VIII, whose ghost lingers around the Tower of London with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. In life, Henry was notorious for his acquisitiveness, dissolving monasteries and melting down sacred objects to fund his extravagant tastes. In death, he has taken to policing the jewels with similar fervor. Tourists who linger too long near the imperial state crown sometimes report feeling an inexplicable pressure to move along, as though an invisible presence were herding them away from what it still considers private property. On foggy mornings, the more imaginative visitors claim to see a hulking figure in Tudor garb looming near the display cases, arms crossed in disapproval. But not all jewel-hoarding ghosts are so blatant. The spirit of Marie Antoinette, for instance, is said to haunt the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, not with dramatic appearances, but with something far more frustrating: misplacement. Curators have documented dozens of instances where pieces from her famed jewelry collection, replicas of which are displayed throughout the palace, are found inexplicably moved overnight. A diamond bracelet shifted from one display to another. A pearl necklace arranged just slightly differently than it had been the day before. The adjustments are always minor, always precise, and always suggest that someone is still very particular about how her things are presented. The most tragic case might be that of Tsarina Alexandra, whose ghost reportedly lingers near the Romanov family's lost jewels. After her execution, the Bolsheviks scattered the imperial jewels across Europe, selling some and hiding others in plain sight. A diamond-encrusted brooch sewn into a pillow, emeralds tucked inside a mundane-looking cigarette case. Alexandra's spirit, it seems, cannot rest while her treasures remain unaccounted for. Staff at museums and private collections that now house these pieces whisper of flickering lights near the displays, of icy drafts that seem to originate from nowhere, and of an overwhelming sense of sorrow when certain items are examined too closely. It is as though the Tsarina is still trying to keep track of what was stolen from her, still mourning the loss not just of her life, but of the beautiful things that once made it bearable. For these royal ghosts, their jewels represent more than wealth. They are remnants of identities that cannot be replicated, of status that cannot be replaced. A crown is not just gold and gems. It is the right to command armies, to shape history, to stand above all others. Small wonder, then, that even in death they cannot let go. So the next time you find yourself admiring a historic gemstone and feel an inexplicable chill, or notice a security camera glitching near a royal diadem, consider this. You may be in the presence of a ghost who still thinks that necklace belongs to them. And given how long they've been waiting to get it back, they're not about to let you forget it. Chapter 6. The Spectral Whispers, Gossip in the Afterlife. If one were to assume that death brings wisdom, dignity, or at least a semblance of maturity, one has clearly never encountered the whispering galleries of royal ghosts. These spirits, who spent their mortal lives embroiled in court intrigue, have not abandoned their favorite pastime in the afterlife. They have simply refined it. Without bodies to confine them, they drift through palace corridors, slip between the cracks of history, and spread rumors with the efficiency of a scandal sheet editor who never needs to sleep. Take Versailles, that gilded petri dish of royal gossip. The ghost of Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's famous mistress, is said to glide through the palace with all the subtlety of a courtier who knows too many secrets. Visitors report catching fragments of whispered conversations near her former apartments, hushed debates about who really fathered certain royal children, which dukes were terrible lovers, and whether that infamous diamond necklace scandal was truly Marie Antoinette's fault, or just very convenient for her enemies. The whispers are never loud enough to be fully understood, just tantalizingly audible before fading away, as though Madame de Pompadour is still delighting in dangling half-truths before an audience. Across the English Channel, the Tower of London serves as a spectral hub for Tudor-era gossip, where the ghosts of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard supposedly hold court in the shadows. Their voices, when they deign to speak to the living, are said to drip with the same sharp wit that once made them dangerous. Anne's ghost, ever the clever one, drops cryptic remarks about Henry VIII's bedroom habits, hints about his impatience, his vanity. Hints at certain performance anxieties that no physician could remedy. Catherine, younger and less discreet, giggles about the king's attempts to recapture his youth with lavish banquets and ill-advised dancing. Together, they form a posthumous comedy duo, their laughter echoing through the stone halls long after their heads stop rolling. But royal ghosts do not limit their gossip to their own heiress. Some, like the spirit of Catherine the Great, take great pleasure in commenting on modern affairs. Visitors to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg sometimes report feeling an inexplicable urge to share their own romantic troubles while standing near her former chambers. Those who do often leave with the distinct impression that they've been judged and found wanting by a woman who took lovers with the same ruthlessness she wielded state power. The air grows thick with unspoken critiques, as though Catherine herself were hovering nearby, unimpressed by modern dating norms. In Vienna, the Habsburg ghosts have turned palace gossip into an eternal spectator sport. The spirit of Empress Sissi is said to linger near the salons where she once endured stifling court protocol, now free to mock it all from beyond the grave. Visitors who listen closely near her portrait gallery sometimes hear faint, disdainful sighs, particularly when modern tour guides oversimplify her life into a tragic fairy tale. She seems to take special pleasure in correcting the record on her mother-in-law, Archduchess Sophie, whose ghost reportedly avoids certain rooms altogether to escape Sissy's whispered critiques. Even in death, these royal spirits cannot resist the allure of a good scandal. They trade secrets like currency, embellish old rumors for entertainment, and occasionally, just occasionally, deign to share them with the living, if only to remind us that history is rarely as neat as the textbooks claim. So the next time you walk through a historic palace and catch a whisper you can't quite place, or feel the sudden urge to confess your secrets to an empty room, beware. You may have just become the latest subject in a ghostly game of telephone, one that has been played for centuries and shows no sign of stopping. After all, when you've been dead this long, what else is there to do but talk? Chapter 7. The Uninvited Guest. Royal Ghosts Who Crash Parties. Death is no barrier to bad manners, as proven by countless royal ghosts who insist on making unscheduled appearances at modern gatherings. These spectral party crashers, still clinging to the belief that their presence is a gift to any occasion, have turned up at everything from state banquets to children's birthday celebrations, leaving confusion, chaos, and the occasional shattered wine glass in their wake. Take King Henry VIII, whose ghost has developed a particular fondness for interrupting weddings. At least 3 separate brides at Hampton Court Palace have reported seeing a corpulent figure in Tudor garb standing at the back of the chapel during their ceremonies, arms crossed, expression critical. He never stays long, just long enough to ensure the bride and groom feel his silent judgment before vanishing into thin air. Some claim he's searching for his next wife. Others suggest he simply can't resist the opportunity to disapprove of modern marriage vows. Either way, his sudden appearances have led to more than one wedding photographer capturing an unexpected guest in the background of otherwise perfect shot. Then there's the infamous case of the Russian Imperial Ball in St. Petersburg, where attendees in 2003 swore they saw a pale, elegant woman in an antique gown waltzing alone in the center of the ballroom. The music hadn't started yet. The staff hadn't opened the doors to guests. And yet there she was, moving gracefully across the floor, until a waiter, not realizing what he was seeing, walked straight through her. The temperature dropped. The music stand toppled over on its own. And then, just like that, she was gone. The consensus? Tsarina Alexandra, eternally nostalgic for the lavish balls of her youth, had decided to have one last dance, whether the living wanted to share the floor with her or not. But royal ghosts don't limit themselves to formal events. Marie Antoinette's spirit has been spotted at modern garden parties in Versailles, her translucent figure drifting between picnic blankets with an expression of mild disgust at the quality of the pastries. Witnesses report the faint smell of roses and powdered sugar lingering where she pauses, as if she's mentally comparing these sad, store-bought macarons to the exquisite delicacies of her time. Occasionally she'll linger near a particularly well-dressed guest, studying their outfit with a raised eyebrow, before vanishing with a sigh that suggests the modern world has deeply disappointed her. Perhaps the most brazen of these uninvited guests is Emperor Nero, who has developed a habit of appearing during outdoor concerts near the ruins of his Domus Aurea in Rome. He doesn't just watch, he interferes. Sing Us reports sudden, inexplicable voice cracks during high notes. Guitarists find their strings slipping out of tune at crucial moments. Some musicians even claim to see a smirking figure in the front row, nodding along as if waiting for them to acknowledge his superior musical taste. He never stays for the entire performance, but his presence is always felt, usually in the form of a sudden icy draft that sweeps across the stage right before someone messes up. What drives these royal ghosts to intrude on the living? The same thing that drove them in life: entitlement. They see no reason why death should exclude them from the world's festivities, especially when those festivities take place in what they still consider to be their homes, their ballrooms, their stages. And so they appear, unannounced and unapologetic, expecting the same deference they once commanded, only to be met with screams, dropped champagne flutes, and the occasional Instagram post, wondering if anyone else just saw that. So the next time you're at a party and feel an unexpected chill, or catch a glimpse of someone in archaic clothing out of the corner of your eye, don't dismiss it as a trick of the light. You may have a royal ghost in attendance. And if history is any indication, they won't be leaving until they've had their fun. Chapter 8. The Haunted Portraits. When paintings judge you. The most dangerous place in any royal palace isn't the dungeon nor the executioner's block. It's the portrait gallery. Here, frozen in oil and canvas, generations of monarchs watch the living with silent disapproval, their painted eyes tracking visitors with all the warmth of an unsatisfied art critic. These are not mere images. They are prisons for royal vanity, vessels for spirits who refuse to stop judging simply because they've stopped breathing. The phenomenon first gained attention at Hampton Court Palace when a particularly fashion-conscious tourist noticed something unsettling about Hans Holbein's famous portrait of Henry VIII. The king's beady eyes seemed to follow her around the room, not unusual for a well-painted portrait. But when she turned back after adjusting her sweater, she could have sworn his expression had shifted from regal disdain to something more personally offended. Security footage later showed nothing amiss, but the visitor remained adamant. Tudor England's most notorious monarch had judged her athleisure wear unworthy of his presence. Queen Victoria's portraits have developed an even more annoying habit. Curators at Buckingham Palace report that the many images of the mourning monarch, always dressed in black after Albert's death, will sometimes appear in slightly different positions after hours. Not dramatic changes, just subtle shifts. A head tilted further down in disapproval when modern decor is introduced to a room, or eyes that seem to roll when overhearing contemporary political discussions. The most famous incident occurred when a particularly avant-garde interior designer proposed repainting one of Victoria's favorite rooms in bright colors. Overnight, every portrait of the Queen in that wing turned its face toward the wall. They only returned to normal after the redesign was abandoned. Marie Antoinette's portraits at Versailles have developed a reputation for being particularly catty. Visitors who spend too long admiring themselves in the Hall of Mirrors sometimes notice the Queen's painted likeness smirking at them from its frame, as if privately amused by their fashion choices. More than one selfie has been ruined by the distinct impression that the subject of the portrait was silently critiquing the photographer's makeup. The palace's head curator swears he once heard a faint "Mon Dieu" whispered from an empty gallery after a tourist walked by in Crocs. Perhaps the most dramatic example comes from the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, where Catherine the Great's full-length portrait has developed a terrifying habit of changing its backdrop to match whatever decor it disapproves of. When modern art was temporarily displayed in its gallery, the painting's ornate palace background faded into a stark black void for the duration of the exhibition. When a particularly garish holiday display was installed nearby, the portrait's normally serene expression twisted into a look of such profound disgust that 3 separate visitors complained to management about being visually scolded by a 200-year-old painting. The portraits don't limit their criticism to the living. Palace staff whisper about the nightly arguments that seem to occur between paintings when no one's around. Guards at the Louvre report hearing faint but heated discussions in French coming from the Renaissance wing after hours, with Jacques-Louis David's Napoleon portraits apparently being particularly argumentative. The most reliable way to trigger these spectral debates is to move one portrait's position relative to another. Within hours, frames will be found slightly askew, as though the subjects have been jostling for better placement. Why are royal portraits such potent vessels for posthumous pettiness? Perhaps because these images were never truly meant to capture likenesses. They were exercises in propaganda, carefully crafted illusions of power and perfection. The monarchs who commissioned them didn't want to be remembered as they were, but as they wished to be seen. Now, trapped forever in these idealized versions of themselves. Their spirits continue the work their painters began, judging, preening, and ensuring no one forgets their magnificence. So the next time you feel uneasy under the gaze of a royal portrait, trust your instincts. That tilt of the head isn't a trick of the light. That raised eyebrow isn't a crack in the varnish. You're being weighed, measured, and found wanting by a ghost who's had centuries to perfect the art of silent judgment. And should you be foolish enough to take a selfie with them? Well, let's just hope they approve of your angle. Chapter 9. The Eternal Pout. Royal ghosts who never got their way. The corridors of history echo with the sighs of monarchs who didn't get what they wanted, and death has done nothing to quiet their complaints. While some spirits move on to higher pursuits, others remain eternally fixated on slights both real and imagined, their spectral forms radiating displeasure like particularly well-dressed storm clouds. These are the royal ghosts who haunt not because of tragic deaths or unfinished business, but because they simply refuse to stop sulking. At Versailles, the ghost of Louis XIV's brother Philippe, Duke of Orléans, maintains a centuries-long pout over being forced to wear dresses as a child. Though he grew to become a formidable military leader, his spirit lingers near the palace nursery, where visitors report sudden chills whenever someone mentions children's clothing. Portraits of him in masculine attire remain perfectly pristine, while those depicting his youthful femininity mysteriously accumulate dust at twice the normal rate. The palace's current head of housekeeping swears that any attempt to thoroughly clean these particular paintings results in every mirror in the Hall of Mirrors fogging up simultaneously, a tantrum befitting the petulant prince Philippe once was. Across the Channel, Henry VIII's sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr haunts Hampton Court, not because of any marital trauma, but due to her cookbook being left out of the palace's official gift shop. Her ghost has been known to rearrange displays, ensuring her prayers and meditations always sits front and center, while copies of rival Tudor-era books mysteriously fall to the floor. Shola Studing in the Palace Library report that pages concerning her culinary contributions remain remarkably well preserved compared to other texts of the period, as though someone invisible takes great care to protect them from decay. The most dramatic sulker might be Russia's Peter III, whose ghost at the Winter Palace remains obsessed with the placement of cutlery. Deposed after just 6 months as Tsar, and allegedly murdered with a fork during dinner, his spirit manifests whenever table settings deviate from 18th century standards. Modern staff have learned to set one place at the servants' table exactly to his specifications. Failure to do so results in all the knives in the kitchen simultaneously turning outward, as if preparing for some spectral tantrum. The current protocol is to occasionally accidentally misplace a fish fork, allowing Peter's ghost the satisfaction of correcting the error before breakfast service. Even royal biographers aren't safe from these eternal grudges. The ghost of Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne to convert to Catholicism, haunts the Vatican Library, where copies of unflattering biographies tend to develop inexplicable water stains resembling tear marks. Researchers report that negative assessments of her reign are always slightly harder to find than positive ones, as though someone keeps reshelving them in obscure sections. The only time her spirit becomes violent is when confronted with depictions of her alleged lesbian relationships. These books are frequently found, flung from their shelves, with enough force to alarm even the most skeptical librarians. Perhaps the most pathetic case is that of Bavaria's King Ludwig II, whose ghost lingers not at his beloved Neuschwanstein castle, but at the Munich bank that refused him yet another loan. Visitors to the historic financial institution report feeling an overwhelming sense of wounded pride near the vaults, coupled with the faint sound of someone dramatically sighing in French, Ludwig's preferred language, for expressing displeasure. The bank security cameras have captured ornately decorated chairs, moving inexplicably into positions where they block access to certain documents. Always financial records from Ludwig's reign. What makes these ghosts so particularly amusing is how trivial their grievances seem centuries later. Wars have been fought, Empires have risen and fallen, yet these spirits remain fixated on cookbook sales and fork placement. But to monarchs accustomed to having their every whim catered to, even small slights cut deep, apparently deep enough to echo through eternity. The next time you visit a historic site and feel an inexplicable wave of petulance in the air, or notice some oddly specific item out of place, you may have stumbled upon a royal ghost's eternal sulk. They can't move on, they won't let go, and they'll be damned, quite literally, if they'll stop reminding us about that one time someone used the wrong soup spoon. Chapter 10. The Ghostly Decree. Royal spirits who still issue orders. Old habits die, but for royal ghosts, they don't die at all. Centuries may pass, kingdoms may crumble, but the instinct to command remains as strong as ever. These spectral monarchs continue to issue proclamations from beyond the grave, demanding feasts for no one, insisting on protocol for invisible courts, and occasionally attempting to restart wars that concluded before the invention of electricity. The Palace of Versailles maintains an entire ledger of unexplained phenomena that staff have learned to interpret as royal decrees. When all the clocks in the Hall of Mirrors simultaneously stop at precisely 8:15 a.m., it means the ghost of Louis XIV demands his morning lever ceremony, an event dutifully performed by baffled but compliant staff who arrange a wheelchair. The Sun King suffered from gout in his later years. Near his bedchamber, and announce his fictional schedule. To an empty room. The ritual complete, the clocks resume working with no explanation. Palace historians note this always occurs on mornings when modern events threaten to overshadow the palace's original purpose, as though the king insists on reminding everyone who built the place. Across the channel, Hampton Court Palace deals with Henry VIII's more physical demands. The kitchen staff long ago learned that when every oven door slams shut at once, and the temperature drops 20 degrees in seconds, they must immediately begin preparing a 6-course Tudor feast. Left unattended, these cooking frenzies escalate. Knives fly across rooms, ingredients spill themselves into pots, and at least one chef swears he saw a spectral hand seasoning a roast with ghostly paprika. The meals always vanish by morning. Those security cameras capture nothing but shifting shadows. Historians suspect this occurs whenever Henry's ghost feels particularly ignored by tour groups focusing too much on his wives and not enough on his culinary accomplishments. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg faces a different challenge with Catherine the Great's ongoing diplomatic decrees. Documents in the state archives sometimes appear rearranged to reflect 18th century borders, with modern maps subtly altered to show Crimea as unquestionably Russian. More alarmingly, the ghost continues her famous correspondence with Enlightenment thinkers. Letters left unattended in certain rooms often gain responses in elegant 18th century French, though the ink vanishes within hours. A particularly bold curator once left out a blank sheet, asking Voltaire's opinion on modern politics. The reply, while illegible by morning, contained enough visible exclamation points to suggest the philosopher would have been horrified by Twitter. Perhaps the most bizarre ongoing command comes from Spain's El Escorial, where Philip II's ghost continues his infamous micromanagement of the building's construction, despite it being completed over 4 centuries ago. Stonemasons report tools moving overnight, with chisels left precisely where new cracks appear in the morning. Architects waking to find their blueprints altered with 16th century corrections in the margins have learned to simply implement the changes, as the alternative involves weeks of unexplained plumbing failures and portrait frames falling at inopportune moments. The current palace administrator keeps a quill and inkwell on his desk at all times, not for use, but as a peace offering to the ghost, who still believes he's overseeing the world's most important construction project. Even death hasn't stopped these monarchs from treating the world as their personal fiefdom. Their decrees may be absurd, their proclamations may go unheeded by the living, but they continue nonetheless. Because what is a king without subjects to command, or a queen without a court to organize? The sheer ridiculousness of a ghost demanding a 12-course banquet for no one or attempting to redraw modern geopolitical borders would be laughable if it weren't so perfectly in character. So the next time you visit a historic palace and hear an unexplained command whispered in your ear, or find yourself inexplicably compelled to bow to an empty throne, know this: you haven't lost your mind. You've simply become the latest subject in a monarchy that refuses to accept it no longer exists. And really, when you've spent a lifetime believing your every whim is law, why would death change that? Chapter 11. The Phantom Ball. Royal Ghosts Who Dance Alone. There is a particular kind of haunting that occurs in the grand ballrooms of Europe, one that requires no jump scares or rattling chains, just the faintest strains of music drifting through empty halls long after midnight. Here, royal ghosts continue their eternal dances, waltzing with partners who dissolved into dust centuries ago, their elaborate court shoes gliding across floors that no living foot has touched in hours. These are not the violent hauntings of tortured souls, nor the mischievous pranks of petty spirits. These are the lonely revels of monarchs who simply cannot bear to let the music stop. The most famous of these spectral soirees occurs monthly at Versailles' Hall of Mirrors, where Marie Antoinette's ghost holds what she considers to be a modest gathering. The chandeliers flicker to life around 2 a.m., their candles burning with impossible blue flames that cast no heat. The mirrors, usually so dutiful in reflecting reality, begin showing a very different scene. One where the hall is packed with powdered wigs and silk gowns, where laughter rings out from mouths that no longer exist. The queen herself always appears last, making what she imagines to be a fashionably late entrance down the grand staircase that stopped being grand about 2 revolutions ago. Palace guards have learned not to interrupt these events, having learned the hard way that doing so results in every clock in the palace striking 13 simultaneously for weeks afterward. At Vienna's Hofburg Palace, Emperor Franz Josef's ghost hosts a markedly different sort of ball. His is a stiff, formal affair where invisible guests stand at perfect attention, only permitted to dance when the emperor himself takes to the floor. Modern visitors who sneak into the empty ballroom after hours sometimes report feeling an invisible hand guiding them through precise waltz steps, their feet moving against their will in perfect time to music only they can hear. Those who resist find their shoes inexplicably scuffed come morning, as though they've been stepped on by a particularly insistent dance partner. The most tragic of these ghostly gatherings might be Peter the Great's summer balls at St. Petersburg's Catherine Palace. Here, the Tsar insists on recreating his famous all-drunken assembly parties, complete with phantom toasts and invisible drinking games. The scene would be merry if it weren't for the way the laughter always cuts off abruptly at 4 a.m., when Peter's ghost inevitably remembers that all his drinking companions are long dead. Palace staff often arrive in the morning to find the grand tables set with hundreds of glasses, all filled with water that somehow carries the distinct aroma of vintage vodka. Even in death, these monarchs cling to their beloved entertainments with the desperation of children who don't want the party to end. Their balls continue not out of malice or unfinished business, but simply because the alternative, admitting the music has stopped forever, is too painful to contemplate. So they dance on, these lonely kings and queens, forever waiting for guests who will never arrive, in palaces the living now treat as museums rather than homes. The next time you find yourself near an ancient ballroom, late at night, and hear the faintest echo of a harpsichord, pause for a moment. That isn't just the wind. That's an invitation. And while you may not see the host, rest assured they see you, and are already judging your footwear. Chapter 12. The Haunted Honeymoon. Love and spite. In the afterlife, marriage is difficult enough when both parties are alive, sharing the same plane of existence and basic physical laws. But when royal couples continue their matrimonial dramas as ghosts, the results range from darkly romantic to spectacularly petty, often within the same haunted corridor. These eternal spouses bicker through walls, stage dramatic spectral reunions, and occasionally still try to murder each other centuries after their bodies gave up the effort. The most famously dysfunctional ghostly marriage belongs to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon at Hampton Court Palace. Catherine's ghost reportedly spends most of her time in the quiet chapel where she once prayed for divine intervention, while Henry stomps through the palace's great halls in a perpetual sulk. The real drama begins when their paths cross. Visitors report sudden temperature drops, followed by heated arguments in Tudor-accented English about annulment's heirs, and who left which spiritual presence in which royal chamber. Their shouting matches often end with unseen doors slamming throughout the palace. Though palace staff note Catherine usually gets the last word. Her ghost has developed a habit of making Henry's portrait fall face down whenever he's particularly obstinate. At Versailles, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette's ghosts have developed a more melancholic routine. On the anniversary of their failed escape attempt, their spirits reenact the entire ill-fated journey from the palace to the gates, complete with ghostly horses and an invisible carriage that always seems to get stuck at the same point where the real couple was captured. Modern visitors who accidentally stumble into this spectral procession report feeling an overwhelming sense of resignation, as though they've become unwilling participants in history's most tragic do-over. The strangest detail? Marie Antoinette's ghost always pauses near the Petit Trianon to adjust her hair, even in death refusing to be captured looking anything less than perfect. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg hosts perhaps the most bizarre post-mortem marriage between Peter the Great and his second wife, Catherine. Their ghosts continue Peter's infamous practical jokes. Visitors report being pinched by invisible hands in empty corridors, or finding their left shoes mysteriously filled with caviar, Peter's favorite prank. Catherine's ghost retaliates by hiding Peter's beloved tobacco pipes throughout the palace, leading to comical scenes where guards report seeing a translucent figure rummaging through drawers in the middle of the night. Palace staff have learned to occasionally leave out a pipe and bottle of vodka near Peter's favorite chair. The next morning, both are always empty, with the distinct smell of tobacco lingering in the air. In Madrid's royal palace, Philip IV and his cousin wife Mariana of Austria prove that royal inbreeding leads to equally tangled ghostly relationships. Their spirits haunt the same chambers yet exist in parallel dimensions of resentment. Philip's ghost still complains about Mariana's Habsburg chin to invisible advisors, while Mariana's spirit rearranges portraits to make herself appear more prominent than her husband. The tension peaks during full moons, when their ghosts supposedly hold separate dinner parties in the same room, each pointedly ignoring the other's spectral guests while competing to produce the most elaborate phantom feast. Perhaps the most unexpectedly tender ghostly marriage belongs to England's Charles I and Henrietta Maria. Beheaded Charles spends most nights wandering the Tower of London, trying to find his missing head, while Henrietta Maria's ghost searches English country houses for her lost Catholic relics. But on the anniversary of their wedding, their spirits reunite at Hampton Court in a moving display of spectral devotion. Witnesses describe seeing two faint figures dancing alone in the great hall. Charles finally complete with his head restored, Henrietta Maria young and happy as she was on their wedding day. The vision lasts only until dawn, when Charles once again begins searching for his head, and Henrietta Maria returns to fretting about silver candlesticks. These royal ghost couples remind us that love and hate both have impressive shelf lives, especially when preserved by centuries of tradition and unlimited palace square footage. Whether bickering through eternity or stealing rare moments of post-mortem happiness, they prove that death is no match for truly dramatic relationships. So the next time you hear two disembodied voices arguing in an ancient palace corridor, don't assume it's just the wind. You may be overhearing a marital spat that began when Shakespeare was still writing sonnets and shows no signs of resolution anytime soon. Chapter 13. The Rejected Coronation. Ghosts who refuse to pass the crown. Death may claim a monarch's body, but it struggles to loosen their grip on the crown. Across the palaces and cathedrals of Europe, certain royal ghosts simply cannot tolerate the thought of another ruler taking their place, their spectral interference turning sacred coronation rituals into absurd supernatural struggles for power. These jealous spirits haunt the very objects of sovereignty, from the crowns they once wore to the thrones they still consider theirs by divine right. Westminster Abbey's coronation chair has seen more than its share of spectral meddling. Edward the Confessor, whose shrine sits nearby, takes particular offense when modern monarchs are crowned above him. During Elizabeth II's 1953 ceremony, several witnesses swore they saw an ethereal hand reach up from beneath the chair as if trying to tip her off. The moment passed quickly, but the incident was serious enough that subsequent coronations now include an unseen ritual. The Archbishop of Canterbury always pauses to address Edward's tomb before proceeding. This appeasement seems to work, though palace staff whisper that the ghost still makes his displeasure known by causing all the candles near the shrine to flicker wildly during the anointing. The Tower of London's Jewel House presents a more aggressive challenge. Here, the ghost of Henry V lingers near his battle-worn crown, apparently still bitter about its later alterations. When George VI was preparing for his coronation in 1937, the crown inexplicably fell from its stand 3 times in one night, despite being securely locked in its case. The night before Elizabeth II's coronation, guards reported hearing a voice reciting Shakespeare's Once More unto the breach from empty corridors. The current solution involves leaving a copy of the Agincourt speech near the crown jewels before any coronation, a small concession that seems to satisfy England's most martial ghost. France's royal ghosts take a more aesthetic approach to their interference. At Reims Cathedral, where French kings were traditionally crowned, the spirit of Louis XVI haunts the sacristy where coronation robes are stored. Tailors preparing modern regalia for ceremonial occasions report pins that disappear and reappear in different fabrics, as though unseen hands are attempting to redesign the garments to 18th century specification. The most dramatic incident occurred in 1825, when Charles X's coronation robe was found, shredded the night before the ceremony, an act universally attributed to Louis's ghost, still furious about the revolution. The current solution? A dummy robe in pre-revolutionary style is always prepared first, then ceremonially rejected before the real work begins. Russia's coronation troubles center on the Kremlin's Assumption Cathedral, where Ivan the Terrible's ghost regularly disrupts proceedings. During Nicholas II's 1896 coronation, witnesses reported seeing a shadowy figure glaring from the choir loft. The ceremony proceeded without incident, but the subsequent coronation banquet saw dozens of glasses shatter simultaneously, a phenomenon that repeated at every Russian coronation until the monarchy's end. Modern historians examining coronation records often report their pages sticking together when they reach descriptions of Ivan's own violent ascension, as though the Tsar himself wishes to censor his worst excess. Perhaps the most pathetic case comes from Bavaria, where Ludwig II's ghost haunts Munich's residence palace, still bitter about his own unfinished coronation plan. The eccentric king had commissioned elaborate new regalia he never got to use, and his spirit now interferes with any attempt to display or study these pieces. Curators report music boxes playing by themselves when someone approaches Ludwig's crown, and the king's monogram appearing in condensation on display cases. The most telling phenomenon occurs whenever a modern royal visits. Security cameras capture orbs of light clustering near Ludwig's portrait, as though the ghost is still trying to compare his would-be grandeur to living monarchs. These coronation-haunting ghosts share a common delusion, that sovereignty is personal rather than institutional, that the magic of monarchy dies with them. They cannot comprehend a world where crowns pass peacefully from head to head, according to law rather than divine whim. So they linger, these eternal kings and queens, still trying to grasp scepters that slip through their fingers, still whispering objections during oaths they no longer understand. The next time you see a monarch's crown wobble unexpectedly during a coronation, or catch a fleeting shadow where no person stands, consider this: you may be witnessing history's sorest losers refusing to leave the game. After all, when you've spent a lifetime believing yourself chosen by God to rule, why would mere death convince you otherwise? Chapter 14. The Eternal Tour Guide, Royal Ghosts Who Overexplain Their Palaces. Some people never learn to read a room, a flaw that apparently persists even when said room exists on another plane of existence entirely. Among royal ghosts, there exists a particularly pedantic variety. Spirits who cannot resist correcting tour guides, disputing museum placards, and generally making sure every visitor understands exactly which window seat was their favorite in 1673. These are not the dramatic, throne-haunting monarchs of previous chapters, but rather the spectral equivalent of that one uncle who insists on explaining family history at every holiday gathering. Versailles suffers particularly from this phenomenon, where Louis XIV's ghost has taken post-mortem micromanagement to new heights. Visitors report hearing an invisible voice whispering corrections as they walk through the Hall of Mirrors. Actually, those candelabras were positioned 2 inches further apart during my reign, or the parquet in this section was always polished with beeswax. Never vencido. The palace's current head gardener keeps finding his hedges subtly reshaped overnight, the topiaries looking suspiciously more 17th century by morning. The most dramatic incident occurred when a particularly bold tour guide suggested the Sun King might have had body odor. Every fountain in the garden simultaneously sprayed her group, despite the water pumps being turned off for winter. Across the channel, Hampton Court Palace deals with Henry VIII's ghost offering unsolicited architectural commentary. Visitors using audio guides sometimes find their devices switching tracks inexplicably, the calm narration replaced by bombastic Tudor-era pronouncements about improvements made during his reign. The ghost takes special offense when anyone praises Wolsey's original design, going so far as to make certain door frames creak ominously when the cardinal's name is mentioned. Recent infrared scans revealed previously unknown writing scratched into a beam in the Great Hall. Upon translation, it proved to be a lengthy rant about proper minstrel gallery placement that archaeologists confirm matches Henry's distinctive handwriting and complete lack of humility. In Vienna, the Hofburg Palace's most persistent ghostly docent is none other than Empress Maria Theresa, who haunts the imperial apartments with the energy of a particularly zealous museum volunteer. Curators report exhibit labels being flipped to their German sides each morning, despite being bilingual installations. More disturbingly, visitors who linger too long at displays about her children, particularly Marie Antoinette, often feel an insistent tapping on their shoulder, followed by the overwhelming urge to move along, as though even in death, the Empress is still trying to control the narrative about her problematic offspring. The palace library keeps a special Maria Theresa appeasement shelf where they display her favorite books exactly as she left them, complete with 250-year-old bookmarks no one dares remove. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg faces a different challenge with Catherine the Great's ghost, who has taken to haunting the museum's digital guides. Visitors report their audio devices suddenly switching to extended monologues about her art acquisitions, often in suspiciously modern French with a Russian accent. The ghost particularly enjoys interrupting discussions about her lovers to instead explain her educational reforms, causing many a tour group to suddenly find themselves learning about the Smolny Institute when they thought they were getting salacious gossip. Palace technicians have given up trying to fix these glitches, instead programming a Catherine mode that allows visitors to opt into her lectures voluntarily. Perhaps the most tragic case is Portugal's Pena Palace, where Ferdinand II's ghost still gives imaginary tours to no one. Caretakers report hearing a voice patiently explaining the romantic architecture to empty rooms, sometimes for hours at a time. On foggy mornings, visitors catch glimpses of a translucent figure gesturing enthusiastically at decorative features while an unseen group oohs and ahs on schedule. Psychics claim the king doesn't realize he's dead, merely that tourism has inexplicably declined since 1885. The palace staff humors him by occasionally moving items slightly so he can correct their placement, a small kindness for a ghost who just wants to share his passion. These eternal docents represent royal ghosts at their most human and most annoying, unable to let go not out of anger or tragedy, but simply because they have opinions about interior decorating that no one asked for. They remind us that even the grandest historical figures had petty concerns, and that death does not magically grant perspective. The next time your museum audio guide suddenly changes topic, or you feel an inexplicable urge to appreciate a particular ceiling fresco, look around. You may have accidentally joined a ghost private tour, and good luck cutting it short before they explain every single tapestry in excruciating detail. Chapter 15. The Ghostly Memoir. Dead monarchs who demand rewrites. History may be written by the victors, but it's endlessly revised by the dead. Royal ghosts across Europe have developed a particular obsession with modern biographies, history books, and even Wikipedia pages about their reigns, haunting libraries, archives, and authors' homes to insist on just one more edit. These spectral micromanagers don't merely want accuracy, they demand flattery, justification, and occasionally complete fantasy presented as undisputed fact. The British Library's history section serves as ground zero for Tudor ghostly interference. Henriette Tate's ghost lingers near biographies of his reign, where researchers report pages turning themselves to highlight favorable passages, or, more dramatically, certain chapters becoming inexplicably stuck together with what smells suspiciously like centuries-old wine. Mary I's spirit specializes in altering footnotes about her religious policies, often adding phantom references to non-existent sources that vanish upon closer inspection. Elizabeth Feuds takes a more theatrical approach. Visitors reading unflattering accounts of her reign sometimes hear a distinctly regal hampier from empty aisles, followed by their book gently closing itself, unless they immediately compliment the Queen's portrait nearby. At Versailles, Louis XIV's ghost has developed a particular hatred for modern academic analyses of his reign. History professors report their computers malfunctioning when writing about his less glorious moments, with files about revoked Edict of Nantes mysteriously corrupted while chapters praising Versailles' architecture remain suspiciously intact. The most dramatic incident occurred when a scholar published an unflattering comparison between Louis and his contemporary William of Orange. The first print run arrived in stores with every instance of William's name slightly blurred, while Louis's titles appeared in suspiciously gold-inked font. The publisher still maintains this was a printing error, though the press operators swear they saw a man in an enormous wig inspecting the proofs the night before. Russia's Romanov ghosts haunt archives with particular intensity. Peter the Great's spirit reportedly moves books about his reforms to eye level, while burying volumes about his violent temper in obscure sections. Catherine the Great's ghost has developed a sophisticated system of interference. Historians researching her lovers often find their notes rearranged to emphasize her political achievements instead, while those focusing on her governance suddenly discover their coffee cups placed directly on top of paragraphs about Potemkin villages. The most brazen act occurred when a biographer left her manuscript about Nicholas II's poor leadership skills unattended overnight. She returned to find every critical adjective replaced with its opposite in handwriting eerily similar to the Tsar's own. The Vatican Library faces unique challenges with the ghost of Queen Christina of Sweden, who abdicated her throne to convert to Catholicism. Her spirit moves books about her reign between the history and religion sections, depending on her mood, and has developed a habit of adding glowing marginalia to favorable accounts of her conversion. Librarians have learned to appease her by keeping a first edition of her flattering biography prominently displayed. When this volume is occasionally found open to different pages, They know to expect particularly active interference in the stack. Perhaps the most tragic case comes from Madrid's royal palace, where Charles II of Spain's ghost haunts genetics textbooks. The last Habsburg king of Spain, famously inbred and physically disabled, spends his afterlife moving medical analyses of his condition to increasingly obscure locations, while leaving more flattering portraits of his reign in their place. Geneticists studying the Habsburg jaw report an unusually high rate of computer crashes when their work focuses too intently on Charles's deformities, accompanied by the faint sound of someone weeping in empty corridors. These editorial ghosts remind us that history is never settled, especially not for those who lived it. They haunt not with chains or shrieks, but with red pens and petty corrections, eternally frustrated that the living dare interpret their lives without consultation. The next time your history book falls open to a particular page, or your carefully typed sentence about a monarch's flaws mysteriously deletes itself, consider this. You may have attracted the attention of a very dead, very particular proofreader. And unlike living editors, these spectral critics never sleep, never forget, and absolutely never let the last word be anything but their own. Chapter 16. The Phantom Feast. Food drama in the afterlife. The kitchens of Europe's historic palaces remain battlegrounds long after their royal patrons have departed this world, where spectral tempers flare over under-seasoned sauces and the eternal insult of modern cooking technique. Royal ghosts, it seems, would rather face 1,000 deaths than tolerate poor table manners or the culinary abomination known as the microwave meal. These finicky phantoms haunt their former kitchens with the intensity of Michelin inspectors who never got their 3rd star, eternally correcting, complaining, and occasionally hurling spectral pots when the living dare deviate from their exacting standards. Versailles kitchens experience the most dramatic interventions from Louis XIV's ghost, who insists on maintaining exact 17th century standards despite 6 chefs quitting in as many years over unexplained phenomena. Sauces reduce themselves at impossible speeds, tasting spoon stir on their own, and any attempt to use modern appliances results in every copper pot in the kitchen clanging to the floor simultaneously. The current head chef maintains an elaborate charade of preparing the Sun King's favorite dishes, placing a single portion in the palace's smallest oven at midnight, only to find the plate empty by morning with the faint scent of lavender and arrogance lingering in the air. The few chefs brave enough to taste these ghostly recreations report flavors so intense they temporarily lose the ability to enjoy modern cuisine, a condition palace staff call the royal palate. Hampton Court Palace's kitchens endure Henry VIII's more bombastic culinary hauntings. The Tudor king's ghost reserves special fury for anything resembling diet food. Low-fat butter substitutes have been known to spontaneously combust, and a particularly health-conscious chef once found all his vegetable oil replaced with rendered lard overnight. The most famous incident occurred during a television cooking competition filmed on site, when a contestant dared to call Henry gluttonous. Every piece of dough in the kitchen rose instantly to unnatural heights before collapsing into inedible lumps, as though the very yeast had taken offense. The current kitchen staff placate the ghost by keeping one cauldron perpetually bubbling with inedible Tudor-style stew, which mysteriously never reduces below half full, no matter how long it simmers. In Vienna, the Hofburg Palace's pastry chefs face constant interference from Sissy's ghost. The famously weight-conscious Empress haunts the dessert stations, where modern attempts at low-sugar baking often result in unexplained power failures, specifically targeting mixers. More dramatically, any pastry deemed too elaborate by her standards will develop perfect teeth marks overnight, despite being under lock and key. A silent critique of unnecessary decoration. The palace's head baker eventually developed a Sisi appeasement cake, a modest sponge with exactly 6 almonds arranged atop, which must be prepared weekly and left in a specific glass case where it disappears by morning without disturbing the container. Russia's winter palace kitchens endure Catherine the Great's more intellectual culinary haunting. Cooks report recipe books, flipping themselves to French cuisine, no matter what they're preparing, and any dish featuring potatoes, which Catherine introduced to Russia, receives inexplicably perfect seasoning. The ghost reserves special punishment for poorly organized kitchens. Utensils rearrange themselves by size when no one's looking, and one particularly messy sous chef found all his knives stuck handle deep in the ceiling beams after leaving his station in disarray. Modern chefs have learned that loudly praising Enlightenment philosophy while cooking seems to prevent most supernatural interference, though this does little to help with staff retention. Perhaps the most tragic culinary haunting occurs at Madrid's royal palace, where Charles II's ghost lingers near the royal chocolate kitchen. The physically and mentally disabled king, whose Habsburg jaw made eating difficult, spends his afterlife watching modern chefs prepare the liquid chocolate that was one of his few pleasures. Kitchen staff report cold spots near the grinding stones and occasional unexplained activation of antique chocolate pots. The most heartbreaking phenomenon occurs on the anniversary of his death. Every chocolate dish prepared that day turns inexplicably perfectly smooth, as though some unseen force is still trying to make eating easier for the poor monarch. These kitchen phantoms remind us that food was never just sustenance for royalty, it was power, prestige, and identity served on gilded platters. The next time your sauce reduces too quickly or your pastry collapses for no reason, consider that you might be cooking under royal supervision. And should you feel an invisible presence peering over your shoulder as you plate up, remember, the only thing worse than a food critic is one who's had centuries to perfect their complaints. Chapter 17. The Haunted Heirloom. When objects have royal attitude. Objects absorb the energy of their owners, and when those owners happen to be monarchs with egos the size of small nations, the resulting artifacts carry attitude long after their royal patrons have turned to dust. These are not merely cursed objects in the traditional sense. They don't bring misfortune or death so much as they bring relentless petty energy, the kind that critiques your posture while you wear them or rearranges themselves to be more prominently displayed. A haunted crown doesn't kill you. It just makes sure you never feel quite worthy of wearing it. The British crown jewels contain perhaps the most notoriously difficult artifacts, chief among them, St. Edward's crown. This solid gold relic has a habit of becoming inexplicably heavier whenever worn by a monarch it deems unworthy. George IV reportedly developed neck problems after his coronation, while Victoria's famously petite frame somehow bore its weight without difficulty. Modern conservators swear the crown's rubies glow slightly brighter when Elizabeth II's reign is discussed, though they've learned not to mention this in official reports. The most dramatic incident occurred during a routine cleaning in 1953, when the crown reportedly levitated 3 inches above its cushion for a full minute after a young janitor joked about trying it on. An event witnessed by 6 staff members who subsequently requested transfers to less haunted departments. Versailles furniture maintains its own peculiar animosity, particularly Marie Antoinette's famed mechanical dressing table. The elaborate contraption, designed to raise cosmetics and jewelry at the press of a button, now operates on its own mysterious schedule. Museum staff report finding its drawers extended in the morning regardless of how they were left the night before, always displaying the exact same arrangement of replica perfume bottles the Queen preferred. Attempts to alter this arrangement result in mechanical failures throughout the entire piece, gears grinding, compartments refusing to open until the original configuration is restored. The table seems particularly sensitive to discussions of the Queen's spending habits. During a 2015 documentary filming, it repeatedly ejected a fake diamond necklace whenever historians mentioned the infamous affair of the diamond necklace. Russia's Amber Room, reconstructed after its WD disappearance, appears to have retained some spectral memory of its original glory. Visitors report feeling watched from the walls, with certain amber panels inexplicably warm to the touch, while others remain cold. The most peculiar phenomenon occurs when large groups enter. The room's acoustics shift to amplify whispers in one corner, while muffling speech everywhere else, as though encouraging secret conversations, just as the original did for Catherine the Great's court intrigues. Conservators have learned that the room prefers to be cleaned with vodka rather than modern polishes, a discovery made when all chemical cleaners mysteriously evaporated overnight, while traditional Russian methods left the amber glowing. In Vienna, Empress Sisi's personal gymnastics equipment maintains its own eerie standards. The rings and bars she used to maintain her famously slim figure now creak and sway on their own, particularly when modern visitors of unimperial proportions attempt to use them. A nutritionist who once joked about the Empress's eating disorders found every piece of equipment in the room swinging violently at once, despite no windows being open and no measurable air currents. The palace now keeps a velvet rope around the equipment alongside a sign reading historical artifact. Do not touch, though staff whisper this is less about preservation and more about preventing further supernatural incidents. Perhaps the most tragic haunted artifact is the Chess King automaton commissioned by Frederick the Great of Prussia. The mechanical figure, designed to move pieces on its own during solo play, now operates without human intervention and plays a brutally aggressive game that matches Frederick's own military strategies. Museum curators report finding games in progress each morning, always with the automaton's king piece advanced recklessly forward in exact imitation of Frederick's battlefield tendencies. On the anniversary of his worst defeat at Kunersdorf, the machine reportedly plays by itself all night, ending each game with its king piece toppled over in surrender, only to right itself by morning and begin anew. These haunted heirlooms remind us that objects outlive their owners, but not their personalities. The next time an antique mirror makes you look slightly worse than expected, or a historic chair refuses to be comfortable, no matter how you sit, consider that you might be dealing with royal attitude, embedded in the very fibers. After all, when you've spent centuries being treated as divine, why would death make you any less particular about how your possessions are used? Chapter 18. The Eternal Exile. Royal ghosts banished. Even in death. Exile is a special kind of death for monarchs, denied not just life but land, not just breath but borders. Some royal ghosts refuse to cross into the kingdoms that rejected them even in the afterlife, lingering at the edges like sulking children pressed against a locked door. These eternal exiles haunt border towns, coastal cliffs, and remote islands, still plotting their triumphant return centuries after anyone remembers what they were rebelling against. The most dramatic of these spectral squatters is Napoleon Bonaparte, whose ghost haunts not his tomb at Les Invalides, but the island of Elba, where he was first exiled. Visitors report seeing a short, furious figure pacing the Porto Ferraio docks at midnight, kicking at the waves that still separate him from France. The local historical society's scale model of Napoleon's villa keeps rearranging itself. Tiny furniture moved into positions of imperial grandeur. The little emperor figurine constantly found facing toward Paris, no matter how often staff turn it elsewhere. During particularly stormy nights, fishermen claim to hear someone shouting orders in French over the wind, though the only words ever distinguishable are impossible and glory. England's most famous royal exile ghost belongs to James II, who haunts the coast of France opposite Dover, staring across the Channel at the kingdom that deposed him in 1688. The attic room in the Château de Saint-Germain-en-Laye, where he died, remains perpetually damp, despite extensive renovations, as though flooded by endless, invisible tears. More unsettling are the maps found occasionally in the morning, modern cartography altered by an unseen hand to show the British Isles labeled My Rightful Kingdom in 17th century script. The current owners keep a portrait of James prominently displayed, having learned that moving it results in all the house's water glasses developing an unaccountable salty taste. Russia's exile ghosts take a more aggressive approach. The spirit of false Dmitri Wars, who briefly ruled during the time of troubles before being overthrown and killed, haunts the Polish-Russian border region near Smolensk. Locals report seeing a richly dressed man demanding directions to Moscow, growing increasingly agitated when told how far east he must travel. Border guards occasionally find official stamps and seals arranged in elaborate patterns on their desks overnight, as though someone has been practicing royal signatures. The most unsettling reports come from truck drivers who swear something climbs into their cabs at lonely checkpoints, an invisible presence that rides silently until they cross into Russia, then disappears with what sounds like a sigh of relief. In Spain, the ghost of Isabella II maintains her own strange exile from beyond the grave. Deposed in 1868, she spent her final years in Paris, but now haunts the Spanish consulate there, particularly the visa office. Staff report typewriters activating themselves to produce documents granting Her Most Catholic Majesty re-entry, while official seals stamp these phantom papers with perfect impressions despite no ink being used. The consulate's portrait of Isabella always appears slightly more regal after these incidents, her posture straighter, her jewels brighter, as though the act of forgery somehow strengthens her spectral presence. Perhaps the most pathetic exiled ghost is Portugal's Manuel II, the last king of Portugal who died in English exile in 1932. His spirit lingers near Twickenham's tennis courts, where he played during his banishment, eternally awaiting a royal summons that never comes. Visitors report seeing a well-dressed man checking his pocket watch every few minutes, then sighing and adjusting his tennis racket. The local historical society's exhibit about him has developed a peculiar problem. Any photograph showing Lisbon automatically develops a faint outline around Manuel's face, as though he's still trying to insert himself into scenes from his lost kingdom. These eternal exiles prove that borders can be more powerful than death itself. Their ghosts don't haunt palaces or battlefields, but train stations and docks, the places of departure rather than arrival. The next time you're at a border crossing and feel an inexplicable chill, or notice someone oddly dressed staring too long at passport control, you might be witnessing history's sorest losers still refusing to accept their paperwork was stamped final centuries ago. After all, when you've spent a lifetime believing land and people belong to you by divine right, why would mere expulsion make you any less possessive? Chapter 19. The Ghostly Fashion Police. Royalty who critique your outfitting? The dead care little for modern sensibilities, least of all when it comes to matters of dress. Royal ghosts across Europe maintain exacting standards even in death, haunting wardrobe chambers and corridors with the critical eye of an eternal social arbiter. These spirits don't rattle chains or manifest as ominous shadows. They communicate through pointed sighs when confronted with denim, or by making sure that one rebellious button refuses to stay fastened no matter how many times you try. Versailles remains ground zero for sartorial hauntings, where Marie Antoinette's ghost holds court over fashion like a particularly opinionated magazine editor. Visitors wearing athleisure or, heaven forbid, shorts report sudden chills moving distinctly upward from ankle to thigh, as though being assessed by an invisible gaze. The palace's hall of mirrors develops inexplicable condensation at eye level when underdressed groups pass through, conveniently obscuring their reflections while leaving historical portraits perfectly visible. Particularly bold influencer who attempted a Versailles-esque photo shoot in fast fashion found every image mysteriously blurred, while her vintage-inspired companion's photos turned out flawless. A clear case of ghostly editorial discretion. Across the Channel, Hampton Court Palace's most notorious fashion critic is none other than Henry VIII, whose ghost reserves special disdain for modern menswear. Security guards report seeing doublets and ruffs rearranged in display cases overnight, always positioned to emphasize their superiority over contemporary suits. The most dramatic incident occurred during a historical reenactment, when an actor playing Wolsey appeared in slightly inaccurate robes. Every candle in the Great Hall simultaneously extinguished, until he changed into a more period-appropriate costume. The current policy is to keep one perfect set of Tudor garments in the actor's wardrobe at all times, which inexplicably never requires cleaning or repairs. Vienna's Hofburg Palace faces daily interference from Empress Elizabeth's ghost, who takes particular offense at modern beauty standards. The palace's Sissi Museum experiences frequent power fluctuations near exhibits about her waist-cinching corsets, always coinciding with discussions about body image. More dramatically, visitors who make disparaging remarks about their own appearances sometimes find the museum's interactive screens switching to display Sisai's poetry about self-acceptance. Makeup compacts left unattended in the restrooms have been known to open themselves, revealing mirrors that show reflections suspiciously more radiant than they should, as if someone is still trying to prove her beauty routine worked. The Winter Palace in St. Petersburg contends with Catherine the Great's more intellectual approach to fashion policing. The Empress's ghost seems to view clothing as political discourse. Visitors wearing garments from countries Russia currently has tensions with report inexplicable wardrobe malfunctions, from popped buttons to mysteriously loosened seams. A French diplomat's tie once untied itself 7 times during a single tour before he gave up and removed it entirely. Palace guides have learned to compliment Catherine's portrait before beginning tours, finding this prevents most supernatural interference with guests' attire. Even royal jewels participate in this spectral critique. The Tower of London's crown displays develop strange condensation when viewed by visitors in casual wear, as though the gems themselves are sweating in distress. A particularly memorable incident occurred when a tourist wore a cheap plastic tiara for fun. Security cameras captured the real imperial state crown sliding 3 inches away from the glass facing her, while the other crowns remained stationary. The offending accessory reportedly developed a crack by the end of her visit, despite no physical contact being made. Perhaps the most tragic case is Portugal's Queluz Palace, where Queen Maria's ghost haunts the royal wardrobe rooms. The mentally unstable monarch, who spent her final years dressed in ragged mourning clothes, now fixes modern garments left by staff, frayed edges trimmed with invisible precision, loose threads vanished overnight. Conservationists discovered this when a curator's worn jacket cuff appeared perfectly mended after being left in a restoration lab. The Queen seems particularly drawn to black clothing, which always appears pressed and refreshed after nights in the palace, regardless of its original condition. These fashionable phantoms remind us that royalty never truly undresses, even in death. Their ghosts remain forever attired in the invisible trappings of status, eternally scandalized by our modern informality. So the next time you feel an unexpected draft around your hemline or discover your most expensive outfit suspiciously wrinkle-free after visiting a palace, know this: you're being judged by experts. And should you hear a faint sniff of disapproval when you reach for comfortable shoes, remember, no amount of centuries will make these royal ghosts understand the appeal of sneakers. Chapter 20. The Last Laugh. Why we love petty royal ghosts. We do not remember kings and queens for their treaties or tax reforms, but for their tantrums and eccentricities. The same applies to their ghosts. These spirits endure not because of their historical significance, but because they remain stubbornly, spectacularly human in their obsessions. A ghost who rearranges silverware is far more relatable than one who merely moans about unfinished destiny. And therein lies the secret. We cherish petty royal ghosts precisely because they remind us that history's most grandiose figures were, at heart, just people who really cared about which fork you used for salad. Consider what we've learned across these tales, that power doesn't vanish with death, it merely becomes more absurd. A king who commanded armies in life now commands the proper folding of napkins in death. An empress who once held absolute authority now exerts it solely over the temperature of soup. These reductions should comfort us, Divinity fades, but pettiness is eternal. The ghosts we've met aren't tragic figures trapped by unresolved trauma, but spirits who could move on if they wanted to. They simply refuse to stop critiquing the drapes. The appeal also lies in how these hauntings invert our expectations. We anticipate ghostly monarchs lamenting lost kingdoms or seeking justice, not sulking because someone moved their favorite chair 2 inches to the left. Their concerns are so wonderfully trivial compared to their former worldly power. Marie Antoinette doesn't haunt Versailles demanding vengeance for her execution. She frets about pastry presentation. Henry VIII doesn't rage about the dissolution of his marriages. He fumes over inaccurate museum labels. It's delightfully absurd, this disconnect between their former grandeur and current griping. These ghosts also serve as accidental historians. Through their fixations, we glimpse forgotten details of daily royal life, the exact angle a crown should sit at, the proper starching of ruffs, the appropriate firmness of goose-down pillows. The living record battles and successions. The dead remember that Louis XIV preferred his chocolate served at precisely 62 degrees Celsius. Their supernatural stubbornness preserves mundane truths that official histories often overlook. But perhaps we love these spirits most for how they democratize history. A ghost who complains about modern footwear is far more approachable than some marble monument to imperial glory. Their continued presence suggests that even the mightiest rulers were, ultimately, just people who got hangry, held grudges over minor slights, and absolutely lost their temper when someone borrowed their favorite quill without asking. Their hauntings remind us that the past wasn't some stately procession of important events, but a messy human drama, where someone was always upset about the wine being served too warm. Most comforting of all is what these ghosts imply about the afterlife itself. If eternity means being trapped with the same petty concerns you had in life, then perhaps death isn't so different from a long Sunday afternoon at a relative's house where someone always argues over the remote. The divine right to rule may not exist, but the divine right to complain about hors d'oeuvre apparently does. So the next time you visit a palace and feel an inexplicable draft, or notice a portrait's eyes following you with particular intensity, smile. You're not in the presence of some awe-inspiring historical force, just another dead monarch who still thinks their opinion matters. And in a way, it does. Their enduring petulance connects us to the past more vividly than any dry textbook ever could, proving that while empires rise and fall, the urge to nitpick is truly immortal. Thus ends our chronicle of history's most gloriously petty ghosts. May they forever haunt their silver polish and proper place settings, and may we forever delight in their inability to let anything go. For in the end, what are we all but future ghosts clutching our own trivial obsessions? The royals merely had the good taste to be dramatic about it.